Thanks for stopping by, witches. My name is Becky and this is BecxReadz, and today I have another recommendation collab for you, perfect for the spooky Halloween season. As most of you probably already know, because I have a book club called the Black Cat Book Coven. I love witches. I love witchy stories. I love witch history. Anything witchy, I'm pretty much down for. So I thought I'm gonna bring it back for a second year, witch book recommendations. So I will have a playlist linked down below. It will have all new recommendations plus recommendations from last year as well. I will be sharing all new recommendations. There may be some overlap between what I share and other people shared in the past, but these will be all new recommendations from me, as well as some new collaborators this year will be giving you their recommendations as well. This year, collaborating to bring you some witchy book recommendations are going to be Andy at A Zebra Reads, Issa at Fun Fantasy Books, Kristin at Kristin Craves Books, and Tara at Tara Talks Books. So all these ladies will be tagged down below, and you can find their videos as well as past videos down there in that playlist as well. Let's kick this off with my 2023 witchy book recommendations. First up is going to be One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. This is a book that I read in August for my Black Hat Book Coven, and this is basically a modernized retelling of Romeo and Juliet mixed with some Russian folklore involving two rival witch families. These rival witch families are pretty much like the mob in New York. They are trying to one-up each other when it comes to maintaining control of the magical drug supply within New York. The patriarch from one family wanted to marry the matriarch of another family. She said no, which kicked off this a lifetime feud between them. Meanwhile, the eldest children from each family were once in a relationship, and the youngest two children from the family are currently developing a relationship. So it's very much a story of just retaliation upon retaliation as they try and one-up each other and take each other down. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would, to be quite honest, because I didn't like a past Olivia Blake story, so this one surprised me. I'm also not the biggest Romeo and Juliet fan, but I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think if you're into Romeo and Juliet, if you're into Russian folklore, if you're into some family drama, you should definitely check this out. The next witchy book recommendation I have for you is The Last Witch of Scotland. This is a historical fiction with some very light fantastical elements, like they're pretty non-existent in here, but this is based on the true story of the last woman who was executed as a witch in Great Britain. Her name was Janet. So this is sort of a reimagining of what that story could have looked like. In this, we are following a young woman named Ayla, whose father has died and she was badly burned in a fire. So her and her mother moved to this very secluded parish in Scotland, and they're just trying to live out their lives the best they can. Her mother is getting up there in age, and she's sort of losing touch with reality. She's losing her memory. So Ayla, even though she is scarred and disfigured from the fire, she's trying her best to take care of her mother. When this new pastor moves into their parish, and he has some strong convictions about witchcraft and women, so he sort of starts to put the spotlight on Ayla and her mother and accuses them of being witches within this town. Meanwhile, we also meet this man named Jack and his group of traveling performers as they travel around Scotland, and he and his group end up meeting Ayla and her mother, and they end up forming a friendship amongst themselves and a relationship. But this pastor is really making life difficult for Ayla and her mother with his accusations, and it's sort of starting to turn the town against them. So it's their story of how they are trying to survive these accusations and how that ties in to the real history of Janet, who was the last woman executed for witchcraft. So if you're into historical fiction that is based on real people, I highly recommend this one. The next recommendation I have for you is Into the Heartless Wood by Joanne Ruth Meyer. This is about a witch queen and her tree siren daughters who live deep in the woods. And they lure humans into the woods to feed their souls to the tree of life. And our main character, Owen, his mother actually went into the woods and never returned. So his father forbids him to enter into these woods. But one day, his little sister ends up venturing into the woods, and he has no choice but to go in after her. And when he gets in there, one of these tree sirens, who is supposed to lure them to their deaths pretty much, ends up saving Owen and his little sister. And so Owen is incredibly curious about this tree siren. So he ends up befriending her, and they end up forming this unlikely relationship where she is sort of the beast in the Beauty and the Beast analogy within the story. This was such a uniquely beautiful story. It was so atmospheric. It gave me fall vibes with this haunted woods. I loved that the roles were reversed and that our main character was a young man who fell in love with this beastly girl. And I loved the twist that it took and how she redeems herself in his eyes. And the ending was just so bittersweet, and it is one of my favorites that I've read this year. So I highly recommend this. Even if you don't like young adult stories, I feel like you could really enjoy this because it does give off like a fairy tale feeling. The next recommendation I have for you is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sanju Mandana. This is my beautiful fairy loot edition. I took the dust jacket off because I just loved the embossing on here so much. But this is about Mika Moon, who is a very solitary witch, and she pretty much performs like fake magic on YouTube for people. And one day she is contacted to be the tutor to these young witches because the people who contacted her know that she is a real witch and these young witches need her help. She arrives at this very mysterious house and she ends up finding this found family that she has been looking for. She ends up finding love with the librarian of this house. This book actually had a little bit more spice in it than I was expecting, which I really enjoyed. And the way she is with these children, it gave me very much House in the Cerulean Sea vibes. It was just so cozy, so heartfelt, and it is one that I definitely recommend. The next witchy book recommendation is one that I meant to recommend last year and I completely forgot, and that is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This is an upper YA fantasy romance about Lou LeBlanc, who is a witch, and she is trying to escape her coven. She's trying to hide out in the city of Belterra, where witches are hunted. When she ends up in this compromising position with Reed, who is a chasseur, or a witch hunter, and he doesn't really know that she's a witch, but to save his reputation, they are forced into an arranged marriage, and he has no idea that his new wife is a witch. And so antics and shenanigans ensue from there. I do really enjoy this series. I can see why some people only liked the first book. It does get a bit repetitive. I actually liked the second book a lot more than the last book, which is an unpopular opinion with this series, but I just loved these characters. I listened to the audiobooks and they thoroughly engrossed me in the story. I loved the enemies to lovers. This is a true enemies to lovers. I loved the banter. I loved that Lou is feisty and snarky. And this world just sucked me into it, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. It's definitely not a series for everybody, but it is one that I recommend. My next witchy book recommendation is Salem's Vengeance by Erin Galvin. This is an upper young adult historical horror. And this was a book that completely surprised me because I had no idea what I was getting when I went into this. This is set in the puritanical days, a few years after the end of the Salem witch trials. It is about a 16-year-old girl named Sarah Kelly who just wants to go out into the woods at night and have fun with her friends, to dance and frolic and have a good time. But one night when she sneaks out to do this, they end up discovering this group in the woods that gives them this powder that ends up turning them insane. She does not take part in this, but her friends do, and her friends end up going crazy. This book really takes a look at the theory of ergot poisoning and how that affected the actual people of Salem and how that could have made everybody think that witches were real, and it really sinks into that. This also deals with some devil worshipping, some human sacrifice, and this was a dark, action-packed, thrilling book that kept me on the edge of my seat. I enjoyed it so much. I do intend to read books 2 and 3. I really enjoyed this first book and I really want to continue and finish out this series. I just haven't for some reason. But if you are looking for a historical horror, definitely give this one a try. My next recommendation is About a Dragon by G.A. Aiken. It's the second book in the Dragonkin series, which is an adult fantasy romance about dragon shifters. But in this one, we meet Talith, and she is having a bad day. When this book starts, She is being burned alive by the villagers for witchcraft. And in comes Brioc, who witnesses this, and he is very sarcastic, and he's waiting till just the last moment to rescue her. So he rescues her, and he takes her and makes her his captive, and they end up in a relationship together. So the witchy element in this is very minute. It focuses more on Brioc as the dragon shifter and his family. But Talith is a witch. She's a very snarky witch. Talith is a single mom as well. She's trying to rescue the daughter who she thought died. She thought these people ripped her away from her at birth. And she's just now discovering that her daughter is still alive. So she's trying to go after her as well. So these audiobooks are really fun to listen to. They're very light, they're very easy to read, and they're just fun and entertaining to read. So I definitely recommend you try this entire series, but this is the one that has the witchy element in it. And my last witchy book recommendation is Autumn of the Grimoire by J.L. Vampa. This is a series about sisters who each one is in charge of a different season, and in this one we are following Agatha, who is the Autumn Witch. And she's tasked by her magical grimoire, who pretty much dictates what she's going to do in life, to fulfill this prophecy where she is to go to the neighboring kingdom and marry the prince there to bridge the gap between their two worlds of magic and non-magic. She doesn't want to do this because whenever her grimoire tasks her to do something, it always ends up in disaster. But she has no choice, so off she goes with her bat familiar, Mabon, to fulfill this prophecy. But when she gets there, she discovers that this prince, her soon-to-be betrothed, has some secrets of his own. I loved the sister relationships. I loved the autumnal vibes within this book. I loved that she had a bat familiar named Mabon. It was so cute. I liked the chemistry between the characters. There's not a lot of spice in this book, and I loved their journey of discovering things about each other as the story went along. So this is definitely a series that I plan on continuing because, come on now, it's seasonal witches and that's just my vibe. Those were my 2023 witchy book recommendations. Let me know down in the comments what is your favorite witchy book recommendation. And be sure to check out the collaborators on this video tagged down below, as well as that playlist where you can find even more witchy book recommendations. And if you've made it this far in the video, could you leave me a magic wand emoji, please? And until my next video, thank you so much for watching, and go read yourself a witchy book, or join my Black Hat Book Coven where every month we read a witchy book. And until then, bye witches!